Well, thank you for joining us for this session of Fact versus Fiction with Jennifer LaGarde and Darren Hudgins. Really important topic during this time of fake news. So taking a look at who's with us today, Jennifer and Darren, we have three outstanding California teachers that are going to be participating in this conversation. So we have Erica Colley from San Antonio Union Elementary School District. Jacob, can you remind me, Jacob Carr, which district you're with?
I'm with Butte County Office of Education in Chico, California.
Fantastic, and don't worry because we'll be able to mute out any pauses. So Napur, good to see you. Napur, hi, I love that joyfulness, right, in the outdoors as well. Napur, remind us where you're at right now.
I'm at Oak Grove School District in San Jose.
So a very solid representation of California. Jennifer, Darren, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your book, Fact versus Fiction, which is really a set of protocols that can help guide teachers to distinguish with their students what's fact, what's fiction, how do I find out, and embedded in the general curriculum. This is going to be a really informative and a joyful session as we get through the information, as we go through this information today. And Jennifer and Darren, start us off. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
We are excited too. Should I share my screen now?
Absolutely.
Okay. There we go, right there.
Oh, I love the spring cue in there, Jennifer. Nicely done. Virtual cue. That is the best graphic I've seen.
Yeah, that's all credit super Hudgins right there. So I have to give him credit for that. I do love it. I think I'm going to make it my screensaver on everything I have.
Way to go, Darren.
Thank you.
All right, take it away, Darren.
Well, I can't tell you enough how excited we are to have you here. Congratulations, you've not only battled a pandemic, but whether you know it or not, you're also battling an infodemic. And the internet has kind of been the prime location for information over these last several weeks. And so, Jennifer, I thought it would be appropriate for us to start this presentation with just a couple examples of how the internet is handling things.
Yeah, don't worry, the internet's got you.
So right out of the chute, you know, we've heard of a lot of the challenges. Whether you've seen this or not, this went viral. We had a coronavirus challenge, and actually I shouldn't say had, we currently are. I'm not going to give this person the notoriety that she wants, but this was the original tweet that came out that started this whole thing. And you can see, well, hopefully you can see that there were 605,000 views. And this was back in March 14th, which was really kind of coronavirus United States infancy. This kind of kicked it off. Well, you can see eventually it began to evolve. And you'll see here, this is one now 5 days later. I wish I could show you, this is actually a TikTok video, but the gentleman in the mask actually starts moving away from this gentleman as he continues to lick the pole over and over. But you can see this one got 2.1 million views. I skipped a lot of things in between, but now we're looking at March 23rd. This is a gentleman who not only says he participated in the challenge, but now has the coronavirus. There's another gentleman in there that I kind of skipped who also has a bunch of videos of sharing this that has now been suspended from Twitter for participating in the coronavirus.
Yeah, so, you know, the internet in its way takes something good like the, you know, Icebox challenge that was for ALS, right, to raise money for ALS research, and turns it into something absurd during a time of crisis. But we don't just have bizarre challenges like this to deal with on the internet right now. We also have the internet taking this time of crisis and creating information to not only engage us in absurd activities, but also make us think as though we are fighting to protect ourselves. The first of these examples is a meme that went viral in which it suggested that because the coronavirus supposedly only lives in the lungs, but lives in your throat for 4 days prior to traveling to the lungs, if you gargled with warm water and vinegar, you could cure yourself of the coronavirus. And this is a meme that got millions and millions of hits across the internet. And that actually was sent to me just yesterday by a friend whose elderly cousin sent it in a group email to many, many people.
This is horrifying, Jennifer and Darren, to see that there are people that are not going to know that this isn't real, and what kind of impact this is then going to have on their health.
Absolutely. And what's even scarier is the second part of this slide, which is I think most people would deem AccuWeather as a legitimate source for weather. Not so much maybe for news, but they certainly try to do both. This one actually was published by them first, that through UV radiation, that we can also slow and kill the COVID virus. This made it all the way into CBS News, CNN, all kinds of different things. And again, coming from what most of us would think is a legitimate source, of course, it's been deemed not.
So the internet uses our fear to do a few things. It gets us involved in crazy things. It makes us think that we're protecting ourselves when we aren't. It also likes to make us spend a lot of money. Here's an article from the BBC in which Amazon talks about, after concerns from the World Health Organization, Amazon has already removed over 1 million overpriced goods and fake cures from its marketplace. Of course, there are still some that slip through the cracks, and many people have paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars for items that would have normally cost them $1 or so, in the hopes that it'll protect them or even cure them.
If you've been on the internet for a while, you know it's meme central. Memes are all over the place. They can be very good things, but they can also be a very quick and easy way for propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation to be spread. In fact, they found that you can send a lot of these in a short amount of time and begin to build implicit biases in people. Here's a particular example of how people were spreading fear of Chinese folks, for that matter, in that if you be careful of the packages that you get, because the air inside of the bubble packets would contain the coronavirus, because it was, of course, the Chinese virus.
Right. And, one thing that Darren and I talk about, we've done a series of articles for School Library Journal, and we do this with kids in our work around the country with school districts on news literacies. We talk a lot about how memes, as adults, we tend to think of memes as sort of these silly internet creations that don't really mean much, but there's emerging research that suggests that for younger people, memes are actually credible news sources. Not that they look at this and think, oh, this is entirely credible. They might, but for a lot of older teens, what they see a meme as is sort of like a flashlight in the dark that points them towards the information they should be looking for. Oh, I'm seeing all these memes about bubble wrap. I should look into that. But when they search using some of the language in the meme, of course, they find more misinformation. This meme in particular might trigger an existing bias or create bias in people who didn't have bias related to Chinese Americans or Asian Americans in particular. But we can see that this translates to real actions involving xenophobia. This image on the right is from a live stream that the children's author Kelly Yang did this last week, in which she has been providing free writing workshops for kids who are stuck at home during the quarantine. Kelly Yang's a very popular writer for young people. Her book, Front Desk, came out last year with many, many accolades. But during this live stream, children, you can see in the feed, started calling her Chinese virus and making all sorts of racial slurs, which, who knows, maybe they come from memes like this, maybe they come from hearing things repeated on the news, etc. But these types of things on the internet have real consequences that affect us in real life. They're not far removed. And when we talk with educators and kids about this, we try to think about all the ways that these impact us as human beings, not just news consumers.
And so I use the term infodemic because the World Health Organization has been putting that into the mainstream, but we know that folks have been dealing with this for a long time. And in these 4 particular slides, we tried to give you examples of the information overload that folks are struggling to handle fact versus fiction, the crisis of authenticity. How do we deal with this whole speed of getting things out? Because we can quickly do that with the tools and the internet that we have, but make sure that it's actually accurate. And then we've come preloaded as humans with a bunch of biases. And then the world that we're living in is both sending things to our phones through algorithms, which are from biased human beings. We are dealing in a social media environment that has all kinds of different characters trying to get your time and attention and create a bias in you so they can profit or make you hurt or fear, or the list goes on. And so we wanted to give you kind of a glimpse into that internet to look at. These are all the things that we're dealing with, and these are many of the things that we discuss not only in the book but when we work with folks. These are not singular. Each one of these slides you could have, we picked, for example, the Corona challenge as information overload. But you could certainly throw this into overcoming biases or authenticity or, the speed and accuracy. Are these people really doing that, or was it Photoshop?
Right.
And
so we look, sorry, go ahead, Darren.
Well, and so with all of this stuff going on, we were really excited when Q decided to put Dr. Espinosa as one of the keynotes. And the fact, and I could cherry pick a lot of things from her presentation, but one of the things that really stood out to me is that their quote was, "There's no cognition without emotion." All of this stuff, the things that we talked about prior, those 4 trust points, they are all targeted. The phones, the algorithms, the trolls, the bots, they're all targeting your emotions so they can make you make decisions. And if you recall her in her presentation, bullet number 3 talked about decisions faster are based on fear. They want to keep you in these emotional states. And as we go through this, and I know Jennifer's really going to draw this out, adults are prepackaged with a lot of these things, but we are actually building the context, the neurons, and all these things in our kids that are going to lead to a future. And if it's all based on fear, it scares us what that might become.
And there's a long-term impact of the trauma that happens in our children that's going to last through adulthood.
And that's the thing, Pam, Darren and I have been knee deep, just immersed in this for the last several years. And I think we have this conversation all the time. One thing that we think is missing from news and information literacy programs around the country is a deep connection with social emotional learning.
Yes.
That we have to be able to understand when we're being triggered so that way we can press pause and implement some strategies for managing our emotional triggers. So, this session, this brief sort of getting to know us session now is not the time where we can unpack that as much, but we will on April 1st. So we are giving you just sort of a teaser for our April 1st session. We think it's really ironic that we are doing a fact versus fiction session on April Fool's Day. And so we're excited about that. But if you have, those of you who are watching, if you haven't already marked our session, it'll be at 4 p.m. on April 1st, and we're excited to see you there. But for today, what we want to do is unpack, if we haven't already, some more specific whys, because the information that's happening today, the infodemic that Darren has mentioned several times, it's not the first one, it won't be the last one. And we've devoted the last couple of years to this work, and we like to talk about why. Because to us, this is the most important work that we can be doing. For now, though, if you'd like to join us in this slide deck, here's the link. It's bit.ly Fact versus Fiction FVF Q 2020 QA. But keep in mind that FVF is capitalized. I will share this link again at the end, but we wanted to give you the opportunity to join us here if you'd like to. And of course, our contact information is there as well. But to start off our why, I think we have to kind of start with how our journey together began. So I'll let Darren take this part.
So warp speed back to 2016. You need to know a little background about me. I was a former social studies teacher and also taught vocational ed, which we're now calling CTE. And I was watching what was going on, not only with the election or prior to the election, but also what was happening in social media. Fake news was being talked about, but it really came to the forefront along with alternative truth. Was listening to this again, kind of in crisis mode. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not new. Propaganda, satire, misinformation, disinformation have been around since the beginning of human existence historically. And so I wanted to try to shed some light on it. And I thought it was a really interesting topic and it was in the forefront of people's minds. This is a photo of the ballroom that I was offered the opportunity to be a featured speaker at NC Ties, which is a regional event like Q in North Carolina. And I went in there all excited, spent a lot of time researching and doing it. And 9 people showed up in a room this size. And Jennifer LaGarde.
Look how far you've come, Darren.
Yes, absolutely. Well, wait, do we have 6 people in this room now? I'm actually going to went the other way, but I'm kidding.
Everybody over at this table, please.
Yes, right, exactly.
I often joke I was lucky enough to be one of the 9 people who went to the very best session at NC Ties that year. And I'll always say, you know, Darren talked briefly about how his background was in social studies and CTE. My background was as an English teacher and a school librarian. And so I walked into this massive ballroom feeling pretty cocky, feeling very confident that I had a handle on how to evaluate information and how to help my kids develop those skills. And I walked out with what can be both the best and worst feeling ever. And that is that, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about this. And I really need to be doing this better. So with Darren's permission, I sort of took his work on the road in so much as I began to use it with my own students and with the teachers I was working with at the time, and to try to develop sort of my chops as someone who was capable of helping educators develop plans for what I felt like was the most important work we could possibly be doing. And I still feel that way. And then it just so happened that this period of time coincided with a cross-country move. Darren mentioned that session was in North Carolina, which is where I lived and taught for 30 years. But then around that time, my husband and I packed up the U-Haul and moved to Washington State, where I live now. And it was literally on that move, and I have a picture to commemorate it, somewhere in Nebraska, where I got an email. This is my mobile office in the U-Haul truck. I get an email from ISTE asking if I would be interested in writing a book for their Digital Age Librarian series. And my answer was no, but I'm interested in doing a book on this topic, but only if this guy will do it with me. And so from the truck, I emailed Darren, hey, want to write a book? And that's not his real answer, but the real one is not rated G. So we have to, this is fake news for you right here. Some fake news right here. But that's sort of the literal journey of this, but there are real and compelling whys behind why we felt like this was the work we had to be doing above all else. Before we start that though, we always include a couple of disclaimers as we get started. And one of those is that obviously Darren and I are adults living in 2020 in the United States. We have political opinions. All of you have political opinions. This session and our work isn't about any of those. Our work in this area is about what I hope is our shared belief that whatever our opinions are and the decisions we make as a result of them are based in fact and not influenced by people whose sole desire it is to deceive us. So we have to put whatever, the idea of sides aside and come to it from what we have in common, which is the desire to make sure that our decisions are based in truth. And then the other brief disclaimer I'll say is we are going to mention our book a lot. We're going to have a lot of activities that you can take with you after Q and do without buying the book. But we mention our book not because we want to sell it. We hope that you will buy it because we believe in it. But we're not here to sell books. We're here to change the world. We are here to make the world better. And so our book is only a small part of that.
It's an important part of that, Jennifer. And, and shout out to both of you because it's the work that matters and the impact that matters. But I will say that your book is worth the purchase.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So
we did work hard on it, but it's not our why. Honestly, it isn't. We always start with this quote because we think it's so important. Y'all know people back in your schools and districts now who have lost their why. We all go into this business for really compelling reasons to help people, and it's when we lose track of that we lose our way. So we want to start with the why always, and here are some of our whys. This is a why for me, these words from Dr. David Lankus. You could replace the word librarian with educator in here, and I think it's still true. Librarians are not neutral. Librarians must be constant advocates for what should be. We are not about preparing the kids for the world we have now. We want to help them be the creators of a better world. We want them to do better than we have done. And in order to do that, we have to be advocating constantly for what should be.
That's powerful.
So I had two reasons for my why. One was my children. I'm looking at the time, right now they're a junior and a seventh grader, and I'm thinking, what is the world going to be like for them if we have no sense of truth? And the second piece that I really stuck to was, this is actually Governor Tom McCall in Oregon a long time ago said this. I am not teaching social studies right now. I was working in kind of an ed tech environment, running events, doing keynotes, workshops for schools, things like that. But I kept looking at this as Jen said, it was just a moral imperative to me that if I don't do something about this, if we don't try, if some people out there don't tackle this, it's not going to be better. And I'm not going to wait for some magical person to come out of the sky and do it. So we're going to do it. And luckily I found a kindred spirit with a whole other set of viewpoints that I didn't have that we're able to meld together and try to make a difference.
This is some of the data that was available at the time that influenced us in terms of why we wanted to do this. Some of you all will be familiar with the SHEG study, the Stanford History Education Group study, in which they looked at nearly 8,000 students over 12 states and asked them to do things like, can you identify the advertisement in this article, things like that. And we unpack that study in the book, but just for the sake of time, the use of their word bleak in terms of the results is, I think, kind. The results of the 8,000 students they surveyed was horrifying. But this study came out in 2016. It is 4 years old now. This is a study that came out last year from the Program for International Student Assessment, in which they added some questions around information literacy. This is just one of the quotes that was pulled from that study, in which they found that only 14% of students in the US were even reliably able to distinguish between fact and opinion. And often when we work with teachers and educators around the country, we ask them, at what age do you start teaching fact versus opinion? And of course, the answers are everything from kindergarten, third grade. And my answer is always like, so before graduation, really, is what we're saying. At this point, kids should know how to do that, and they don't. Darren, I feel like I took a couple of your slides, but I'm going to keep on going here.
All right.
But this is another piece of information that came out in 2016 that was a why for us, which was just around the total number of false news stories that were shared on Facebook in the months leading up to the presidential election. You can see that from February through Election Day. We went from being able to sharing news stories that were reliable and accurate pretty regularly to completely losing our minds at the end and sharing false stories over 1 million times more than those that were independently verified as being true. More up-to-date information around that comes from the Pew Research Center, in which they polled Americans and asked them about those Americans who use social media for news, how often or how regularly did they find that they shared information that turned out to be false? And you can see that those folks who use social media did this more than those who did not. And of course, we also know from Pew, even though it is not in this slide, that social media now is the preferred source of news for all age demographics, even those of our parents. Are using social media more and more for news consumption. And then this is another piece of information that we found to be really compelling and related to this, is that we know that, this is from the Pew Research Center again, where when we poll adults and ask them to identify fact versus opinion in a news story, you can see that of the thousands of adults that Pew polled, only 26% were able to identify all 5 factual statements that they were given, and only 35% were able to identify the false statements, or the opinion statements rather. So we can see that, our kids are not great at this. They haven't gotten any better since 2016. And guess what? Neither are we. And we haven't gotten any better either.
The reason we haven't gotten any better is because this is an example of a story that came out. 3 million illegal immigrants voted in the 2016 election, which was not true, but this was spread to over 3 million people in a little short of 3 minutes. And this is how many things got pushed out because of those viral rumors. The second thing is, and Jennifer, you could go, that our online platforms of where people are going to get this information are shifting. And they're shifting into a visual medium. I mean, it used to be Walter Cronkite. It used to be on the radio, it used to be in certain places. Now these are constantly changing, and you can see how they've shifted. Facebook was king, and now most currently YouTube is king. We're also seeing a movement of children. Back when a long time ago, this group could probably relate to, everybody was on MySpace that was a kid. Once the adults got to MySpace, they went to Facebook. Now the adults are at Facebook, and they're going to Snapchat and more specific TikTok. And so what this is leading to is this Wild West. And if you go to the next slide, Jennifer, the Wild West of these apps that continue to come out. And I didn't even get into WeChat, and I didn't get into Fortnite. And before that, it was Pokemon Go. And it's hard to keep up where these kids are. But what we do know, and this was an imperative part of our book, we know that they are going mobile, and most of the world is mobile because it's cheaper. And Jennifer's going to talk about the other half of the slide, but I have to tell you, those pictures that are in that phone I took in schools physically. We are banning these phones in school, even though 90% of the time our kids are on those devices.
And what a missed opportunity that is to teach.
Yeah, for real. And I would say not even a missed opportunity. It really is doing children a disservice. This graph was a game changer, as Darren alluded to, for us in the writing of fact versus fiction. We were about halfway through, and we found this information from the Pew Research Center, and we were like, whoops, we're doing this wrong. We have to stop and figure out how we can help teachers harness mobile devices for teaching information literacy, because news looks different on a mobile device than it does on a laptop or a desktop. And when we go to schools and districts and work with teachers in this, that is the place that we continually see news and information literacy being held, is on a desktop or a laptop, even a Chromebook. And it's not that the skills that are being taught aren't good, they don't transfer. The skills of teaching kids how to recognize propaganda, manipulation, fiction, photos, fake hoax, all of that, those skills are still valuable. The idea of triangulating is really still valuable. But how do you teach them to do that on the mobile device? Do those skills transfer when they leave that building and they're accessing information where there are layers to finding authenticity? These are some screenshots. There's a whole chapter in our book that looks just like this. We created a fake news self-assessment where
It
educators.
is self-soothing though, Jennifer.
It is self-soothing, yes.
Okay.
It is a self-assessment in which educators and their students can look at news and evaluate news stories as if they are presented on a mobile device. Is this as good as actually having the device out in front of you? Of course not. But if you're in a school where the culture is such where we got to keep those devices in pockets or in backpacks or whatever, there's still a way for you to build a bridge for your kids between the tools we have at school and the tools they're actually using to get information. Darren and I will talk about this later, but one of our articles for School Library Journal provides a protocol for helping kids think about the layers that social media adds to determining credibility. And those layers are even more complex when we're viewing it through the app, because most kids are not looking at information on a browser on their phone. They're looking at it through TikTok, through Snapchat, through Instagram. Well, how do you determine some of the things that we teach kids to look for in terms of credibility when you're looking at news there? And this has been a huge part of our work.
And the part that's left out of that is how are they doing it without a frontal lobe? How are they doing it without understanding what their amygdala does? I mean, we could get into all the brain situation. I use this graphic a lot. It's actually from 2009. The iPhone, for example, was created in 2007. So I think the graph's a little bit off because I don't think you could predict the explosion of the smartphone and the internet growth, and even its very small sliver to the right of gaming and how much gaming has changed. But what I love about the graphic is that it shows just this massive amount of media that is all being colliding into the time that we're living in. And in a case to go back to Jennifer, they're all colliding in people's phones, in their pockets. Those devices are more powerful than the computers that we used to have when we were kids. And I'm talking about a different generation. But we're just really, really worried about it. And the next slide, I think the focus for us is kids are watching. Kids are watching how we as adults deal with them. I mean, if you're on your phone 24 hours a day at the dinner table, if you have one, if you're constantly spreading things to people, I mean, like we could just go down the line of all these things. The kids are watching. How do you deal with it? What do you do? And Jennifer and I are, consider ourselves to be somewhat experts in it, but we get fooled on it all the time. Jennifer already alluded to this, but we're not only are the kids watching, so the watching part to me is the overt part. They're watching how we handle it, how we deal with it, and what do we do. But then there's this whole covert side, which is this social emotional piece. These lies, this misinformation, whatever that is, the fact that you can't even distinguish between the two is creating anxiety in people. It's creating an ability to not understand, like, social awareness. Like, you're hearing, we brought up the fact of the xenophobia that, like, people are targeting folks of Asian descent. They might even not be from China because they're so angry and upset and frustrated about, for example, this pandemic. I could go on and on about the social emotional part, but we're worried about how their brains are being built and what what are these neural pathways if we're not teaching them at all. If we're just giving them a phone or having them access to the internet and we're just saying good luck, go with it. So Jennifer and I spend a lot of time burning our favorite candle, which was a gift that Jennifer sent to me over Christmas. And so I burned it and made this photo because I just love it. I love it.
But in reality, like we joke about this, but really and truly, not to get too mushy about it, we want to be a light in the dark. You typically, about this point in whatever presentation we're doing, we show a GIF of 3CPO saying we're doomed, because it can feel that way. It can feel like this is too big, the mountain's huge, we can't move it alone. But the thing is you're not alone. That we're all in this together. If we have the will to right the ship, we can right it. It's just about making this a priority when we go back to school, because it's not tested, because it's not written in many state curricula yet. We have to make it a priority because it's the right thing. And Darren and I want to be the light to help guide you if you need it. We want to help support that work. So with having said that, we wanted to open this up to questions. We have some activity examples that we can point to, or if our questions lead us in another direction, that's fine too.
There's that dramatic pause again.
I know, right?
We will cut that dramatic pause. So what I hear you two talking about is an ethical responsibility that we have. And while we don't see it embedded in content curriculum, we can take the current standards and apply it to the work that we're doing as we go through what is fake news, what is real news, and then how do we figure out the difference between the two?
Right. A lot of states have adopted the ISTE standards as their digital teaching and learning or technology standards. And in the book, we point to specific standards, ISTE standards, and we also point to some of the ALA standards, AASL standards for school librarians, and how these can be the foundation by which we meet standards and focus on standards, but also embed this content. And I think content curricula lends itself to this. I mean, regardless of what content you're teaching, you can use content related to the subject area and throw some of those skills in there, and you can certainly model it when you're showing media. Whatever content you teach, all content areas now are media rich. And so therefore, since we're using media in all of our content instructions, we should be teaching kids how to evaluate media. And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll promise I'll let someone else talk. But we think, Darren and I talked about this earlier, that this should be procedural. We teach kids how to sit on the carpet, crisscross applesauce, how to wait for their neighbor to make a comment before they interject. We teach kids how to walk down the hallway to the restroom. We teach them how to get the bathroom pass. We teach them when it's appropriate to do this, that, and the other thing. We think that information literacy skills have to be procedural so that they are part of just what we do in our culture of learning.
Couldn't agree with you more. Darren, we all have devices with us. Could you guide us through an activity that helps us distinguish the difference between something that is real and something that is fake?
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of ways to do it. How I like to do it with students is I typically will pick something that is in the media today or on Instagram or in a space that they're in. And then what I would do is begin to start taking them through several steps. Like, for example, can you find out when, and you can see on this particular slide over to the left, like, when was this published? And so there's a, not to get too deep in because there's a bunch of, we're going to talk a little bit about it in our workshop, but there's a bunch of strategies. Like, you can take them through step by step. So like, what is the date? Who is the author? Where is it located? Do you see it in multiple spaces? Kind of triangulate it. But then there's also this strategy of like, you can practice lateral reading. And so if any of you have heard of John Green, he's got a wonderful crash course. I can't remember if it's number 3 or number 4 on lateral reading. And the idea is that you take kids into a space and then you begin to get them to open up a bunch of tabs. And in researching what this is, so you don't take it right at face value. You take it as, this is something that we don't know if it's true. And so then how do we find out? Well, again, you open up a tab and start looking. Is it in some other places? Has somebody else published it? What are they saying about it? Then move to another tab and go, okay, is this author credible? What have they done in the past? What are other people saying about it? The next thing it would be like, okay, do they cite any sources in there? And if they do, let's go check those sources. Where do they come from? A lot of the slides we showed you in here like are coming from TikTok. And so the question is like, are reputable people, and I don't mean that they can't be like, they're not good people on TikTok publishing things, but is good research sources, is good journalism being published on TikTok? Somebody might slap me in the face, will say, Darren, what about citizen journalism? Okay. There's some really good citizen journalism, but there's a lot of garbage in there too. And so just taking TikTok, for example, and saying that is okay and it must be real, you've gotta go through multiple layers of that. And so that's my quick answer, Pam. I certainly
Can I add to it?
Yeah, always.
Can I jump in there? Sorry. This is how Darren and I do. We just add to each other's thoughts.
Yeah,
but
right.
I wanted to point to just add to what Darren was saying is that this is a link to one of our articles in School Library Journal in which we talked about taking news literacy mobile. And in that, we shared a protocol that we saw. I actually saw a fourth grade librarian, a librarian who was working with fourth graders, use with his students, in which he took the CRAP test, which is a very standard protocol for information literacy. Lots of schools use it. But this is not
They
what
also,
we're...
They also giggle too. So that,
Yes,
it
right.
initially hits the frontal lobe that they're trying to build. They love it. No,
Yes, for sure. And there's a fart one. There's lots of them based on excrement. You can find tons of them. So, but it doesn't...
And we have their attention immediately.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, but it doesn't matter what your school district is using. You may have a different acronym. They all base themselves on kind of the same things that Darren was talking about. When is it published? Who wrote it? Does that person have a motive? All of those things. But what this librarian did is he had students going through at centers, at stations in his fourth grade class, looking at them from the same story, but from different sources, one of which being on a laptop or a desktop, one of them being on a mobile device. And depending on the group, they access the same story from different apps. And then they talked about how did they find the answers to the CRAP test on the web versus on the mobile device. And then what was their reflection on that? It was harder for me to figure out X, Y, and Z in the app, etc. So we think that giving kids the opportunity to sort of think metacognitively about, comparing these two things, these two steps in a parallel way, and then thinking metacognitively about which one is harder for me, what steps do I have to make sure that I take, etc., is important. And by the way, I'll just want to add this, that he did this in a school that is one-to-one Chromebooks, but he was able to cobble together 5 iPads and his own phone to provide that station or center for his students. So you don't have to have a cart full of mobile devices to make this happen. What other questions do y'all have?
So Jacob asked one in the chat, and I don't know, for folks who can't see it, it says, do you think we've hardwired kids to accept digital media as real more than fake? My wife and I are frequently watching press conferences on Twitter, and they convey the message to our kids. What they don't see is the internal progression of how she and I are checking sources. All they see is us using social media as our source. And then he's kind of got a second question to that. I think I sort of alluded to that earlier in the presentation, is the kids are watching. So you nailed it. Like whatever you tend to say, at least depending on their age, I have a junior now, maybe not true, but what you say is the truth, right? Like, so you're conveying this thing and they believe in you and they believe what you do. And expressing to them what you didn't just pull it off of one source, that you did look it up, that you did spend the time having those kinds of discussions. They even bring up stuff to me that they get on their phones, and I'll say, okay, is that true? Are you sure? And I, actually make them go back, and probably the worst dad in the world, but I make them go back and research and find out. And then pretty soon they find out, like, oh my gosh, like this isn't true at all. And that's scary that they're spreading that. They begin to, by going through that process, feel that empathy part, or that emotion, or what would you feel like if they were spreading that kind of rumor? That kind of example. Does that answer it, Jacob, or are you looking for something else?
No, that really helps out. Yeah, thank you very much.
I think Darren.
Modeling. If I had to quick sum up, Jennifer, sorry, I'd just say modeling is everything. I mean, like,
Modeling and talking through the process, right? So there's that thinking that happens in our minds that nobody can see. And as teachers and as parents, making sure that as we ourselves go through that process, we're speaking it aloud for the students to travel that process with us.
And I think that's important too, to add to what has been said, is that we do that when we get it wrong too. A lot of times when we are fooled by something online, we delete that post and pretend it never happened because we want to be smarter than the average bear, right? Especially as educators. So it is really important for kids to see what we do when we get it wrong. What do we do? What is our reaction to that? How did we figure out that we got it wrong? How did that make us feel? And how do we own up to that and be a model for other people to say, hey, it's okay that we got it wrong?
And to add to that, we had that model in this presentation, and we actually took it out because we want to use it on April 1st. And so I'm not pitching that because I'm really excited about this opportunity, but we found in the process, like I had sent Jennifer something, Jennifer found out that it got sent to another person, and this is us making a mistake. Now we're going to show it and we're going to talk about it and do all of it. But I mean, like, it is important. It's important to show we're not all, we all get duped in this, but getting to the truth is more important.
Are there other questions in the chat, Darren? I can't see the chat.
Yeah. What do you think about content that is already out there to you? What do you think about content that is already out there to use to the skills? We are moving to textbook-free education.
Yeah. I'll start on this one and just say that, I think with anything, there's some good, bad, and ugly. I'm not a big fan of canned curricula in general. I think sometimes as a teacher, I like to cherry pick those things for individual activities that I think are good, as opposed to just sitting kids down in front of some modules for a week and then check they've done information literacy. I think what a lot of those resources lack, because just out of by virtue of what they are, is they lack the connection to the human aspect of this, the social emotional learning, the value and importance of these devices in our lives. And that's where the teacher has to make the learning sticky, has to make the learning real, by connecting it to the social emotional parts of us that help us remember things and also help us see why learning is relevant. So I'm not, any particular canned curricula out there, it's better than nothing. But I think good teachers will do what they've always done, is that they will take that, or they'll take the resources in our book and they will make them sticky and human for the kids that they teach.
And I will put out a couple of things that I think are good that we do talk about in the book. For example, the News Literacy Project is fantastic. They also have a component called Checkology, which is kind of a little bit of a canned thing. But like, if you need a primer other than our book, right? We decided we weren't going to do that, but I'll do that anyway. If you need a primer to get started, those ones are excellent. There's also some out there. There's one News Literacy Project also puts out a thing called the Sift, which is actually a newsletter that they send to you, that they debunk things. And then there's some things that you can use, kind of like what Jennifer's talking about on a current event standpoint. These are in the know right now, and here's a couple of examples. I think if you're looking from a starting point, that's the way to go. As you get better at it, tailoring it, and Jennifer and I are all about, let's talk about what's in people's minds right away, right now.
And Jennifer and Darren, I think that was a really powerful question, because we went over the statistics earlier that showed what a hard time students are having distinguishing between what's real and what's fake. And as adults, we're having that same difficulty. At the same time, we're making a transition to a lot of open educational resources. And so how do we know that the resources, and I don't expect you to answer this right now, but as we make that big shift, how do we know that the information that we're grabbing as part of OER is true, is real, and is good? And we have that same question with the textbooks as well, because we know that textbooks have been biased for decades, and the information can be misleading or can create systemic biases that we have to deal with. But as teachers get that increased level of responsibility, or curriculum directors and assistant superintendents of curriculum, we need to take a look at how do we develop those skills to make sure we're picking and delivering the content that is real, and making sure that our parents and our students have confidence in that.
Absolutely. We talked about how we didn't want to plug our book, so I'm going to take a minute to plug our second book, which we're working on right now, which is piggybacks on what you're saying, Pam, because I think our second book is all around the idea of the digital detective, and how we all must do detective work when we are looking at any source of information, whether that's a textbook, an OER resource, an article from Snapchat, a video from TikTok. We all must be detectives. And so we have to develop that attitude of healthy skepticism, so that we're constantly applying that detective lens to whatever the information is. And that goes for both the adults and the kids, the little learners in our buildings. Because if we can't do it, then how in the world are we supposed to be able to teach kids to do it?
For sure. So as we get ready to wrap up our hour together, we have had these amazing teachers on the session with us here, and I'd love to put all three of you on the spot. And let's take that reflection moment, right? Tracy gave us a 3, 2, 1 the other day, if you had a chance to watch her keynote, right? And so we're going to go straight to the 1, right? As you take in the information that we heard here today about fact versus fiction, that ethical responsibility that we have to give these digital citizenship skills to our student, what is one thing that you will do moving forward with your instructional practice? One thing. Jacob.
First off, this is incredible. I'm a high school English teacher, so I try to tackle this all the time. I was making some notes. I don't know if you can see my screen. Now it's all digital. I want to make
real notes, Jacob.
They're digital notes. Yeah, I'm a sketch noter, so being Sylvia the other day was fantastic. I wrote down a note here that I want to make like a Snopes assignment, like find something out there and then do the research and find out if it's fact or fiction. I think that would be so much fun, and then publish it on the platform that you found it to help other people.
Yes, I love it.
Fun.
Very nice. Nupur.
I have to say, Darren and Jennifer, your presentation was awesome. As I was listening, I was just, going through that guilt. I have a 12-year-old myself, and like, man, I do this all the time. Oh my God, besides just being an educator. But when I asked you that question, is what was coming to me is kids are all in that content, and why don't we use the content they are within and use that to teach the skill? And I'm speaking from a middle school English language teacher. So hi, Jacob, we need to collaborate together at some point.
Let's do it more often.
Yeah, I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and they are all into TikTok, Instagram, and everything. So, there is content already. Why don't, and I have to teach a skill, critical thinking skill, how do you rebuttal an argument? And why can't I use content from there and argue? So, right when you were talking about it, the idea was just sparking in my head, and said next week I could just do, let's take out some information you're seeing online and let's argue about that. How genuine is that? Let's argue present your argument about that, just using content from where they are. So I'm definitely going to use more of that kind of stuff and question my information, even though I don't listen to a lot of news, but I'm on social media. Yeah, digital questioning and being a detective. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, but can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Are you on TikTok? Are you in Snapchat? Are you in those spaces where those kids are?
I am.
Okay. So because when we ask a lot of people those questions, because I 100% agree with what you were talking about. Like, you have to be in there and do, because that's their world. A lot of people are like, I don't do social media.
So Darren,
or I don't do, and so you're already not on their plane. You're not already talking with them.
How do we guide them and teach them if we're not in their world?
Yeah, when I told my 12-year daughter that I'm going to get TikTok, she's like, Mom, you don't need to get on TikTok. I said, I need to.
Yes.
I need to do my research. I'm doing my research here. These are my stakeholders. I need to do my research, buddy.
Yeah. I love it. Good for you.
I'm on TikTok. I've been dying to make a TikTok with my 12-year-old, but she's like, Mom, you don't know how to dance. I'm like, one day.
I love it.
Thank you, Nupur. And Erica.
I think for me, I come from the primary world. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about, the thing that I really identified the most with today was modeling those metacognitive strategies. So much of what we do in primary is modeling thinking and leading our students through our own thought processes to help them become their own thought processes. And so as I was listening, I was thinking about modeling those things, because even in first and second grade, we start to hear things come in from these different sources and older students and things like that. And so I think taking opportunities to address what comes into the classroom from outside sources and modeling what that thinking process is going to look like would be huge for my little students.
Erica, I have to jump in here and point to a slide we didn't get to, but that's the end of the slide deck. We shared a bunch of what we call do tomorrow activities. And this is a piece of one of those activities. We created a book list for helping kids digest the news and think about tough topics in the news. And also, most importantly, little ones digest how adults react to the news. And so these are 3 picture books that we love and that you may have already heard of or have in your classroom, but that we love and that think are really valuable for little ones. And I also just want to reiterate what you said. Your habits become their habits. So when you pull up a YouTube video saying, oh, we're going to watch this video. Wait a minute, who posted this? Let me see. Oh, there's a blue check mark next to that. I know that that's reliable. Just modeling it. You don't have to have a lesson, just making that your habit so it becomes theirs. I love the way you phrase that. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this featured session. Nupur, Jacob, Erica, it was great to see you in here. And Jennifer and Darren, your work is outstanding. This is a gift you give to humanity. It's so important right now. And thank you for joining us in this featured session and for having a follow-up session as well. I'm sure it will be filled. And your book is going to get some more sales, and rightfully so. And I'm looking forward to seeing those protocols being implemented in different classrooms across the United States. And we do have folks from quite a few other countries joining us as well. So this is your passion. You are making an impact. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pam, and you and John both, thank you for this opportunity. I mean, we really appreciate it. I hope we showed how passionate we are about it. So thanks.
Absolutely. I mean, we're happy to just be a conduit of the work that you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you.
And everybody, we'll be right back with our next featured speaker.